I have been tracking them electronically now for about 8 months, and there were a total of 8 saucers. I don't call them UFOs. I don't like that, because literally they are saucers. I've seen them so close, and the data I have in the way of photographs, I will say this, are not the classical, beautiful UFOs floating over beautiful countryside. These things are loaded with scientific data. They are identifiable as saucers, however, and they are very clear.
There are some documents in circulation, which again, as most of these documents are, become quite a topic of controversy. They did involve a series of events, sightings over Kirtland Air Force Base as detected and filmed by a gentleman named Paul Bennewitz, who had a scientific technical development company there that had government contracts. In fact, his office resided virtually at the gate of Kirtland Air Force Base.
I drove to Albuquerque and met up with Paul and introduced myself and ended up staying at his house for a couple of days. And he told me all his stories.
As for Bennewitz, by 1981, he was gathering data from a variety of sources and amalgamating it with information being fed to him by a number of government people, in whom, for some reason, he seemed to have an implicit and abiding faith.
Respect his government, and, I don't really care, because I am working with the government. I'm liaisoning presently with the military, and it is on its way to the National Security Agency. This is of national importance, security, and significance. This is of worldwide significance, and we are, figuratively speaking right now, we are under attack at this point.
The military took an interest in his story. As more information emerged, Mr. Bennewitz was gaining information via his computer terminal, ostensibly from an alien civilization or life form, quite extensive material. And also he was led to believe the aliens were harassing or persecuting him, entering his home.
The story that emerged from this melange of fact, fiction, fantasy, hearsay, hard data, and government disinformation was absolutely incredible. Yet, somehow, Paul believed in it and set out on a one-man crusade to tell the world that malevolent aliens from space were in league with our government to take over the planet. What had begun in 1979 as an effort to learn whether the behavior of a woman who claimed she had been abducted by UFO aliens and was being influenced by some sort of radio remote control had, in the space of less than 3 years, blossomed into a tale which rivaled the wildest science fiction scenario anyone could possibly imagine.
And involved in all this was the account of a possible underground base or a facility near Dulce, New Mexico, which has also become more known in the field in the last several years. Then another element of controversy injected into this was the suggestion that what happened to Mr. Bennewitz, at least in part, was part of a manipulative government disinformation campaign.
Paul took the surveillance activities, which included wiretaps and, according to Paul, even break-ins, as proof positive that he was onto something big. Unfortunately, he seemed largely unaware that the same people who would go to such lengths to spy on him also had the capabilities to mount an effective disinformation campaign.
Eventually, the story became so obfuscated and complicated with peripheral elements that at this time, I don't know if we'll ever know what really happened, but the plausibility exists that yes, he did stumble onto something, and perhaps he was the subject of disinformation, and to see how he reacted to it.
In any case, by mid-1982, Paul's story contained virtually all of the elements found in the current crop of rumors being circulated around the UFO community. There were 2 groups of aliens, one malevolent, one more friendly. The malevolent ones, which Paul referred to as the Greys, were really in control. And they were the ones responsible for the cattle mutilations, for human abductions, and the implanting of sinister control devices in humans, for having first made and then broken a secret treaty with the U.S. government, for maintaining a secret underground base under Archuleta Peak near Dulce in northwestern New Mexico, and for having supplied the U.S. government with alien space hardware and weapons which ultimately proved defective or which were caused to crash, thus leaving human civilization virtually defenseless against invasion.
In 1979, something happened, and the base was closed. There was an argument over weapons, and our people were chased out. More than 100 people involved.
Why did the other Greys leave? You say there was one still here. Why did the others leave? Did it have to do with the conflict in 1979?
That's what I think, but I don't know.
I knew all this before any of this information came out. These 44 scientists were being given this briefing by a Gray at Dulce in a auditorium, small auditorium.
Allegedly, what happened in '79, there was some sort of information exchange going on where there were actual live aliens at the facility, and at one particular point, there was an area where some security personnel went to enter. And apparently, because of not the sidearms, but the bullets in the sidearms, from what I understand, if they would have entered the area, the bullets would have detonated. And supposedly one of the creatures tried to stop the security personnel from entering the area, and a fight ensued.
For whatever reason, a Delta Force security guard who should have known better, because they were all briefed, do not go anywhere near a Gray with any kind of weapon or ammunition, because you will be killed immediately. For whatever reason, this security guard walked into this auditorium, and the Gray killed him immediately.
And the bottom line from the altercation was that the security personnel, I don't remember how many were involved, but were all killed, and they died of head wounds, and that's all that I heard of that story.
And in the clash that occurred at the base, when there was a disturbance of some sort, the aliens killed 66 of our people, and 44 got away.
And the Gray killed everybody, the Delta Force and the scientists, and that was 66 people. And that became, somebody named it the Dulce War. It was not a war, it was a mistake by the security guard.
Yes, I was involved in in 1979, in August, late August of 1979. I was involved working through Los Alamos Laboratories at Dulce, New Mexico, and what's now known as the Alien-Human War. 66 Secret Service agents, government workers, geologists, and the like. I almost bit the dust. I could have been number 67. Lost their lives that day because the government lied and knew full well what was underneath them.
The whole Dulce story started in 1987 when me, Linda Howe, Tom Adams, and several others met in Crestone, Colorado, to discuss the state of UFOs.
There was a meeting of the minds, if one dare call it that, forgive me, but in Colorado, I believe it was in Durango or somewhere in that area, and John Lear was there, Linda Howe was there.
And during that meeting, it was about 3 or 4 days, Tom Adams walked over to me, he said, handed me a note. The note was from him, from who I call Mr. X in Henderson, Nevada, and told him about that he had a friend that worked at an underground base in New Mexico, that the halls went on forever, tile walls, and a little bit of the stuff. And Tom handed me, he says, John, I don't have time to go out there and research this, would you look into it? And I said, sure. Me and Linda Howe went in my truck all throughout New Mexico. We stopped and talked to Ernie Edwards, who was the key figure in the Bennewitz deal.
And what ended up in John Lear's report and ultimately the thing called the Dulce Papers and whatnot, all came out of Bennewitz. And it's exactly what the government wanted to happen.
We went down and interviewed Clifford Stone and Then I eventually drove back to Las Vegas and met with Mr. X. And Mr. X started telling me about Dulce, about the guard that had witnessed the atrocities that were going on there and didn't agree with them, and had decided to escape. And he escaped with allegedly 7 minutes of videotape that showed the hallway, 25 black and white photos, and 100 pages of information.
Recently, one of the most prominent figures in the current disinformation wave, which has been sweeping the UFO community, was quoted as having stated that he found Paul Bennewitz's information to be 100% true. This person spent a couple of days talking to Bennewitz back in the summer of 1987.
I drove to Albuquerque and met up with Paul and introduced myself, and ended up staying at his house for a couple of days. And he told me all his stories.
And he has spent considerable time since spreading elaborate and increasingly sensationalistic stories based, he claims, on information gathered from a variety of unnamed sources. Strip away the fluff, and what you have left is essentially the Bennewitz story all over again. There is no question in my mind that it's mostly disinformation, pure and simple. And since I know that connections exist between those who are spreading it now and those who were spreading it then, both from the Bennewitz angle and from within the intelligence community, it seems reasonable to conclude that those responsible for it are not satisfied their task has been completed even after all this time. Knowing what is going on, however, is simply not enough. The real question is why.
It began for me in 1963 when I was assigned to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe. I arrived in the summer of '63 and I was assigned to the Operations Division. I was further assigned to what we call SHOC, the War Room, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And at that time I was given a cosmic top secret clearance, which was and still is the highest level of security access that NATO has. When I was assigned to the War Room, I learned that a study had been initiated in 1961, and everybody was talking about it. They were gossiping about it. And the subject was UFOs, and that intrigued me a bit. When that study was concluded in 1964 and it was published, and I was still working in the War Room at that time, I had access to this document. I had a chance to read it. And having been exposed to it, I must tell you honestly that my life has never ever quite been the same. Because I read first-hand reports, verifiable NATO military material that indicated that the UFOs were not only real, but they represented something far beyond anything I had ever imagined before.
I received documents which said that a UFO had landed in the middle of White Sands, New Mexico proving grounds, and that this object was inert, was under surveillance, and would be kept under surveillance until they could determine whether it was hostile or friendly. It later turned out that it was friendly in that the occupants were dead, and when we got aboard there were 5 bodies. The bodies were diminutive in size, in other words 3.5 feet. The largest one was just under 4 feet. 2 of them were obviously the commanding officers because 2 of them wore epaulets on their shoulders. Later turns out that they were all male. When we flew them back to Wright-Patterson, of course, the examination, physical examination, and the autopsy, of course, revealed that they were indeed all male.
At the time when I read the document, it was reported in the document that the United States had in its possession several UFOs. Technological reports showed that on a few of them they had been dismantled. There was a photograph of what was labeled as an atomic generator or a nuclear power unit, which was no bigger than a basketball. Several of the autopsy pictures showed alien cadavers on autopsy tables that had been vivisectioned.
I had just come from the CIA, and I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And then I was placed on temporary duty with the intelligence of then the Army Air Corps, and which later very quickly became the Air Force as we know it today. But it was during that time that I received what we call fax today. It was a Twix. Came across my desk, and of course I was G2 Air. Now, G2 Air has to do with all intelligence having to do with strange things in the air, you know.
Phenomena.
Phenomena, yeah, exactly. And what happened was the commanding general sent me a Twix that he had received from 3rd Army headquarters, stating that a UFO had crashed at White Sands, New Mexico, and was presently under observation. And the observation was to determine whether they had friendly intents or they were hostile, if there was any occupants aboard, you know, and were they men and women or all male or whatever. So a lot of questions were being asked.
In June of 1977, Bill English claims to have been shown a top-secret government document dealing with UFOs, aliens, abductions, and experimentation on human beings. Shortly after viewing the document, he went underground and was not heard from for years. Since re-emerging in late 1988, English has told a frightening tale of harassment by the government and even claims that several attempts were made on his life.
Project Blue Book Report number 13 consisted of 624 pages typed offset, reproduced on white paper with a gray cover. It covered U.S. government official UFO procedures, classifications, and all top-secret UFO activity from 1942 through 1951, addendum to 1963. Last year, I met with a former information analyst with the Air Force Electronic Security Services who saw an actual copy of the Project Grudge Blue Book Report number 13. This man's name is Bill English and will be speaking with us today. I also talked with Bill Cooper, formerly of Naval Intelligence Briefing Team, who also saw the Grudge 13 report.
I came into my office one day and was asked to analyze a document called Grudge Blue Book Report number 13.
Okay, let me stop you right there. Let me share with you what some of the 4 major conclusions of the assessment were in 1964. And consider those bits of information with what you've already learned in your own research and studies and what's been brought out in films and UFO conferences over the last 10, 15 years. In 1964, they had determined, at least this is in the NATO study, and I know for a fact that this is the conclusions that had been reached by our own military as early as 1949. Number 1. Planet Earth is and has been the subject of an extensive, massive, very thorough and detailed study by several extraterrestrial civilizations. Now that's an attention getter in itself. Number 2, these civilizations have demonstrated an extremely advanced technology, possibly hundreds or even thousands of years beyond our own. It gets better. There seems to be a process or a plan of some kind unfolding. The studies indicated and demonstrated that a development of some kind of program was underway. Evidence collected indicated that the program has been going on for a very long time, possibly hundreds or even thousands of years. And some of my associates, research fellows, and I have concluded it's probably been going on longer than that. The study concluded that there did not appear to be a major military threat involved in 1964. That if they, whoever they are, were malevolent or hostile, there was absolutely nothing we could do, because the level of technology that had been demonstrated was so far beyond anything we had in 1964 that we felt that if they were hostile or malevolent, the game was up. It was all over with.
The document was entitled Grudge / Blue Book Report 13. It was my job to read the document and analyze what we called a probability factor of factual information. Yeah.
All right. What basically did it contain? What met your eyes when you?
Well, aside from the standard military jargon, clearance, monitored viewing only, this kind of thing, the special codes that go along with it, and that kind of thing. The report itself contained several items. Most notably were a series of photographs, several dozen photographs of things like autopsy reports on alien bodies, photographs of the alien bodies, photographs of technology, recovered disc, and this kind of thing, and tons and tons and tons of technical reports.
Project Grudge, which contained the most astounding information I have ever seen in my life. And from that day forward, my life has never been the same. It has not been normal in any way, and I wish that it had been somebody else who had seen the information, but because no one else has had the guts to stand up and talk about what they've seen, I'm kind of glad that it was me, because I do have, and I will continue. Because you need to know what was in those documents and what's happening.
All right, so you see the document, and what kind of a credibility rating what kind of rating did you assign it?
Well, initially I looked at it and I read it through very carefully, and I thought that this was a joke. I really did think it was a joke until I got to the section of photographs, which I recognized. Those were the photographs of the mutilated bodies in the B-52 that we recovered in Vietnam. I recognize those photographs because I took them.
Okay.
And in the report, it said, essentially, the story behind it is that the last transmission from the aircraft stated that they were under attack from a bright light. And this apparently was repeated 2 or 3 times, and then all communication with the aircraft broke off.
And this is the first you knew that the incident that you had investigated was connected to UFO.
Right. This was the very first thing, very first time I realized what was going on. And then I started rereading everything, looking at the photographs. I had some photographic experience. I tried to see if they were tricks. I looked at the photographs under a magnifying glass, realizing that there was a possibility that these things could have been manufactured in a good special effects lab. But I saw no sign of it, and based on the other material that I saw in it, and based on those photographs that I saw, I eventually decided that there was a very high probability that the material was true. And at that point, I assigned to it a 98% probability rating of being accurate information.
Now, if I had not seen the UFO with my own eyes first, I would have thought that this whole scenario that I saw in these documents was a hoax. Not perpetrated by the Navy or the Office of Naval Intelligence or the United States government to fool me or to fool anybody else in the Navy. I would have thought it was a hoax after I had read Operation Majority that outlined the plans for the secret government, the secret world government, to come into power. I would have thought that it was a hoax to scare you into bringing that about, and I still think that they're going to use it to try to bring it about. And I want to warn you beforehand not to believe a word they tell you when they tell you there's going to be an invasion from outer space, because there's not going to be.
Warning, top secret, eyes-only document containing compartmentalized information essential to the national security of the United States. Eyes-only access to the material herein is strictly limited to those possessing Majestic 12 clearance level. Reproduction in any form or the taking of written or mechanical transcribed notes is strictly forbidden. Copy 1 of 1.
There would have to be a control group established to examine, understand, and determine what the makeup of it is and what the motivations are and what our vulnerability is.
UFO investigator Jaime Shandera believes that proof of just such a group does exist. in the form of authentic-looking documents sent to him on film in December 1984.
This copy was sent to a Los Angeles man named Jaime Shandera, a man active in UFO research. It came through the mail in a plain brown envelope as a roll of undeveloped 35mm black and white film. The first 8 frames contained the document, then there were 5 blank frames, and then there were 8 frames of the documents again. The briefing outlines the history of the flying saucer recovery and the current members of MJ-12. Who sent the document? We don't know. We know that part of MJ-12 wants the truth out, part doesn't. MJ-12, we know, has become military top-heavy over the past 20 years, and we all know that the military does not want to admit a mistake. But somebody is trying to help us.
How did you acquire the MJ-12 documents?
Well, they were mailed to me in a plain brown envelope, which contained President Truman's executive order establishing MJ-12 and the briefing document to President-elect Eisenhower, informing him of the 1947 crash in Roswell, New Mexico, and the recovery of alien bodies. Now then, there were follow-up postcards, Ethiopian picture postcards mailed from New Zealand with puzzles and riddles.
Right, the puzzles were clues. For example, for a stylish look, shop Suitland. This led us to the National Repository in Suitland, Maryland, where we discovered the existence of top-secret documents and filed a Freedom of Information request, which led us further to the Cutler-Twining document.
Now, all of our meetings with Falcon were secret.
Now, wait, gentlemen. Riddles, postcards, secret meetings, code words. Didn't you suspect somebody was pulling your leg?
Well, we always look for a hoax, but within every clue, there was always some verifiable fact.
So you were able to verify MJ-12?
Validating MJ-12 was difficult because we couldn't find any government agency that would admit publicly that they were aware of MJ-12's existence.
Well, so without validating it, how do you get from there to here?
Well, after hundreds of hours of research, we're working with experts trying to validate the documents. But most important, the contacts have grown to include Falcon and 9 other government agents.
Now, why do you believe them?
Well, because we've been able to meet with them, we've been able to check and verify credentials, and it's clear that they are in secret, need-to-know positions. Falcon's position, for example, gives him access to the MJ-12 infrastructure.
The anonymous arrival of the so-called MJ-12 documents in December of 1984 was another factor we had to contend with in this increasingly confusing web. The problem of their origin and authenticity was and remains a major issue. And on this point, our position of neutrality has constantly been misinterpreted. Therefore, for the record, it is important to point out here once again that at no time have either I or any of my associates ever stated that these documents are authentic. Our position has consistently been that we do not know whether they are authentic, but that we as investigators remain unaware of any convincing evidence which would suggest that they are not.
Other known government agencies feed information to MJ-12 through a top-secret cover project known to us as Project Aquarius.
Now, MJ-12 connects to select individuals within the National Security Council, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the White House Intelligence Unit, the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. The research is conducted, the data classified and cataloged, all under the umbrella of strictest national security.
Along with the Eisenhower briefing document, both Shandera and Friedman have found cryptic references to MJ-12 in declassified government documents, but nothing has bolstered the authenticity of MJ-12 more than this. More anonymous films sent to ufologist Don Berliner in 1994. On it, a supposed military field manual dated 1954.
This was a set of instructions, really, to retrieval teams who would be at the scene soon after an event took place in which a saucer had crashed and in which there were bodies and wreckage. How to wrap them, what kind of boxes to use, where to send the pieces, what the cover stories were. And one of the things that comes through loud and clear is they wouldn't have put such a manual together unless this had happened more than once, which makes you wonder, so how many of the crashes were there? How many bodies were retrieved?
The MJ-12 policy is headquartered at the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. The United States Navy has the primary operational responsibilities of field activities relating to the MJ-12 policies. All information gathered in the field, not necessarily by Navy personnel, is transmitted to the Navy for analysis.
The group that runs this project Whether it really is the Navy or they just say that, apparently these people have executive power. They don't report to anyone.
I think that that I was intentionally shown documents when I was in the Office of Naval Intelligence that convinced me that extraterrestrials were real. And I really believed that. And when I first came public, of course, I told everybody what I saw in those documents. And I told them I didn't really know the reality of it, but that's what the documents said, and I had no reason to question those documents.
The version of the document that I saw was an annotated version. Mr. Cooper saw his version of the document in the early 70s. I saw my version of the same document in the mid-70s. My version of the document had been expanded considerably. A large portion of the document consisted largely of photographs. Photographs which showed alien beings alive and dead.
I saw pictures of 3 of those dead alien bodies in a report called Project Grudge.
Photographs were taken of E.B., which among others I and Bill English were to view years later in Grudge 13.
I did see was what I believe to be autopsy photos. It was a creature, and its chest was cut open in a T fashion, the skin peeled back. There were also photos of one single large organ that was removed that was also cut up and being weighed. Whether or not they're absolutely authentic, I can't say. I can only assume because I was working on a craft that I know to be of alien in nature, that the other material that came along with it was probably authentic also.
This is a picture of what is known as an EBE. They probably come from a star system known to us as Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, about 38 light years from here.
Tell us about the briefing files. Under what conditions did you gain access to them?
I was put into the briefing room with 121 or 22 briefings and really was just told to sit and read through them. I think they were there just to mainly educate me on what was going on. They weren't a complete in-depth explanation on everything else, but just essentially a brief synopsis on some of the other projects that were going on there. Supposedly, the information, now this isn't something that I determined, it's something I was told, that the crafts originated from a planet that orbited the Zeta Reticuli star system. Zeta Reticuli 1 and Zeta Reticuli 2 are two stars of a binary star system. The craft allegedly came from there.
When the study was concluded in '64, they concluded that there were 4 different groups apparently coming and visiting us. Out of those 4 different groups, one group looked exactly like we do, so much so that they could sit beside you in a restaurant or in an airplane or in a theater, and you'd never know.
Well, that's assuming that extraterrestrials are a reality, which they may not be.
Definitely may not be.
Yeah.
Who knows for real who these are? I've heard many stories.
Well, I used to think that they were real. As you well know, I saw documents when I was in the Office of Naval Intelligence that said they were real. I've looked into the possibility that this whole thing is a tremendous mind control operation. In order to convince the public of the world, the mass consciousness of humanity, that the Earth is being threatened by some other species from some other planet, which Ronald Reagan stated in 6 of his speeches during his administration, which is way too many times for me to believe that it was real. It's more like just putting it into people's minds.
You mentioned these beings have historically interacted with man. How? What was involved there?
Allegedly, this interaction has occurred since, man was a simian creature, and, there were genetic alterations made.
How specifically did the briefings detail how the aliens manipulated our genetics over the centuries?
It mentioned 65 or 63 corrections or additions to the genetic makeup that finally resulted in, a human creature.
Over the years, I've done a lot of research. What I've discovered is there's no proof existing anywhere that extraterrestrials are real, or that have ever visited this planet, or that they exist anywhere in the universe. There is not one shred of evidence anywhere. It's just an incredible deception. And I'm just amazed that people have fallen for it in the manner that they have in the absence of any proof whatsoever. I mean, they cite hearsay as proof. It's a scam. That's what I can tell you. What they call UFOs, these craft that fly around the sky, are real. But they're not piloted by some little green guy from some other planet. The technology is real. It's been kept secret, and it's been used to promote this concept that there's an alien threat to this Earth.